Undead and Unwed by Mary Janice Davidson. It's been a hell of a week for Betsy Taylor. First, she becomes a corporate layoff victim. Then she gets killed in a car accident. But what really bites is that she can't seem to stay dead. Every night she rises with a horrible craving for blood. And she isn't taking too well to this new liquid diet. And now, Undead and Unwed.
Chapter 1. The day I died started out bad and got worse in a hurry. I hit my snooze alarm a few too many times and was late for work. Who wouldn't hit the snooze to get another 9 minutes of sleep? No one, that's who. Subsequently, I almost always oversleep. Stupid snooze button. I didn't have time for breakfast. Instead, I gobbled a pair of chocolate Pop-Tarts while waiting for the bus. Chocolate. My mom would have approved. Who do you think got me hooked on the darn things? But a nutritionist would have smacked me upside the head with her calorie counter. The bus was, of course, late. You gotta love the Minnesota transit system. 6 buses for a population area of 250,000. When they weren't late, they were early. I'd lost count of the number of times I'd stepped outside only to see my bus disappearing down the street. Schedule? What schedule? When the bus, late again, finally did lumber into sight, I climbed on and sat down in gum. At a 9 a.m. meeting, to which I arrived at 9:20, I found out the recession, the one the economists have been denying for years, had hit me right between the eyes. I had been laid off. Not unexpected. The last time good old Hampton and Sons had been profitable, I'd been in high school. But it hurt just the same. Losing a job is the worst. You know, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that somebody doesn't want you. Doesn't matter if the reasons are personal, financial, or practical. They just don't want you. Hampton and Son, realizing about a year too late that they had to slash costs, decided administrative layoffs were the way to go, as opposed to, say, cutting the 6-figure salaries of senior management. The clerks and secretaries had been deemed expendable. But vengeance would be ours. Without us, those twits couldn't even send a fax, much less run the company. With this cheerful thought, I cleaned out my desk, ignored the way my coworkers were avoiding looking at me, and scuttled home. I consoled myself by stopping at the Dairy Queen for a blueberry milkshake. Signs of spring, robins, new grass, and Dairy Queen opening for the season. As I walked through my front door, still slurping, I saw my answering machine light winking at me like a small black dragon. The message was from my stepmonster, and from the racket in the background, she was calling from her salon. "Your father and I won't be able to make it to your party tonight. I'm on new medication, and we just can't. Sorry." "Sure you are, jerk." "Have fun without us." "No problem." "Maybe you'll meet someone tonight." Translation: maybe some poor slob will marry you. My stepmonster had, from day one, related to me in only one way: as a rival for her new husband's affections. Worse, she never hesitated to play the depression card to get out of something that was important to me. This ceased bothering me about a week after I met her, so I suppose it was just as well. I went into the kitchen to feed my cat, and that's when I noticed she'd run away again. Always looking for adventure, my Giselle, although it's more like I'm her Betsy. I looked at the clock. My, not even noon. Time to do laundry and gouge out my eyes, and the day would be complete. Happy birthday to me. As it turned out, we had a freak April snowstorm, and my party was postponed. Just as well. I didn't feel like going out, putting on a happy face and drinking too many daiquiris. The Mall of America is a terrific place, but I've got to be in the mood for overpriced retail merchandise, rowdy weekend crowds, and $6 drinks. Nick called around 8 p.m., and that was my day's sole bright spot. Nick Barry was a superfine detective who worked out of St. Paul. I'd been attacked a couple of months before, and... Okay, well, attacked is putting it mildly. Like using the word unfortunate to describe World War II. I don't like to talk about it, to think about it. But what happened was, a bunch of creeps jumped me as I was leaving Khan's Mongolian barbecue. All you can eat for $11.95, including salad, dessert, and free refills. Quite the bargain if you don't mind your clothes reeking of garlic for hours. I have no idea what my attackers wanted. They didn't take my purse, or try to rape me, or even babble about government conspiracies. They came out of nowhere. Literally. 1 minute, I was yawning and fumbling for my keys. The next, I was surrounded. They clawed and bit at me like a bunch of rabid squirrels, while I fended them off with the toes of my Manolo Blahniks and screamed for help as loud as I could. So loud, I couldn't speak above a whisper for 3 days. They stank. Worse than my kitchen that time I went to the Cape for 2 weeks and forgot to empty my garbage before I left. They all had long hair and funny-colored eyes, and they never talked to me. Help didn't come, but the bad guys ran away. Maybe they were rattled by my voice. When I scream, dogs howl. Or maybe they didn't like the way I stank of garlic. Whatever the reason, they ran away. Skittered away, actually. While I leaned against my car, concentrating on not passing out, I glanced back, and it looked like a few of them were on all fours. I struggled mightily not to yark up my buffet, ginger tea and sesame bread. No way was I pissing away that $11.95, and then called 911 on my cell phone. Detective Nick was assigned to the case, and he interviewed me in the hospital while they were disinfecting the bite marks. All 15 of them. The intern who took care of me smelled like cilantro and kept humming the theme from Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. Off-key. This was actually more annoying than the sting of the antiseptic. That was last fall. Since then, more and more people, they didn't discriminate between women and men, were being attacked. The last 2 had turned up dead. So yeah, I was freaked out by what happened, and I'd sworn off cons until the bad guys were caught. But mostly, I was grateful it hadn't been worse. Anyway, Detective Nick called, and we chatted, and long story short, I promised to come in to look through the big book of bad guys one more time. And I would. For myself, to feel empowered, but mostly to see Nick, who is exactly my height, 6 feet, with dark blonde hair cut regulation short, light blue eyes, a swimmer's build, and dimples. He looked like an escapee from a Mr. Hardbody calendar. "I've broken the law, officer. Take me in." Making Nick my eye candy would be the closest I'd gotten to getting laid in... What year was it? Not that I'm a prude. I'm just picky. Really, really picky. I treat myself to the nicest, most expensive shoes I can get my hands on, which isn't easy on a secretary's budget, and never mind all the money my dad keeps trying to throw at me. If I used his money, they wouldn't be my shoes. They'd be his. Anyway, I save up for months to buy the dumb things, and they only have to go on my feet. Yep, that's me in a nutshell. Elizabeth Taylor. Don't start, I've heard 'em all. Single, dead-end job. Well, not anymore. Lives with her cat. And I'm so dull, the fucking cat runs away about 3 times a month just to get a little excitement. And speaking of the cat, was that her telltale meow from the street? Well, super. Giselle hated the snow. She had probably been looking for a little spring lovin' and got caught in the storm. Now she was outside waiting for rescue. And when I did rescue her, she'd be horribly affronted and wouldn't make eye contact for the rest of the week. I slipped into my boots and headed into the yard. It was still snowing, but I could see Giselle crouched in the middle of the street, like a small blob of shadow, one with amber-colored eyes. I wasted 10 seconds calling her. why do I call cats, then clomped through my yard into the street. Normally this wouldn't be a problem, as I live at the end of the block and it's a quiet street. However, in the snow on icy roads, the driver didn't see me in time. When he did the absolute worst thing. Slammed on his brakes. That pretty much sealed my doom. Dying doesn't hurt. I know that sounds like a crock, some touchy-feely nonsense meant to make people feel better about biting the big one. But the fact is, your body is so traumatized by what's happening, it shuts down your nerve endings. Not only did dying not hurt, I didn't even feel the cold. And it was only 10 degrees that night. I handled it badly, I admit. When I saw he was going to plow into me, I froze like a deer in headlights. A big, dumb, blonde deer who had just paid for touch-up highlights. I couldn't move. Not even to save my life. Giselle certainly could. The ungrateful little wretch scampered right the hell out of there. Me? I went flying. The car hit me at 40 miles an hour, which was survivable, and knocked me into a tree, which was not. It didn't hurt, as I said, but there was tremendous pressure all over my body. I heard things break. I heard my own skull shatter. It sounded like someone was chewing ice in my ear. I felt myself bleed, felt liquid pouring from everywhere. I felt my bladder let go involuntarily for the first time in 26 years. In the dark, my blood on the snow looked black. The last thing I saw was Giselle sitting on my porch, waiting for me to let her in. The last thing I heard was the driver screaming for help. Well, not the last, but you know what I mean. Chapter 2. Being dead really makes you think. Mostly, it makes you think about all the stuff you screwed up, or didn't do. It's not that I had this tremendously exciting life or anything, but, geez, I would have liked to have lived more than a measly 30 years. And when I thought of the way I wasted the last year, the last 10 years, ugh. I was never a genius. Strictly C+ average, which was just fine. Who could worry about geometry and civics and chemistry when I had to work on my talent number for the Miss Burnsville pageant? Not to mention keeping 3 or 4 fellas on the hook without them realizing they were on the hook. Sometimes I was exhausted by lunchtime. Anyway, I tolerated high school, hated college, just like high school, only with ashtrays and beer kegs. Flunked out, modeled for a bit, got bored with that. People never believed me when I told them modeling was about as interesting as watching dust bunnies. But it was true. The money was okay, but that was the only good thing about it. Modeling, contrary to the idea projected by the media, wasn't the least bit glamorous. You spend your days going to cattle calls with your portfolio tucked under one arm and a desperate smile on your pretty face. You get maybe 1 job in 10, if you're lucky. Then you get up at 5:30 in the morning to do that job, and often work an 18-hour day. Then maybe 5 weeks later, you finally get paid. And that's after your agent holds the check for 10 days to make sure it clears. Still, I had some fun in the beginning. Runway shows were made for the strut. It was a kick to tell people what I did for a living. This is America, after all, land of the shallow. Announcing the way I earned my money was always good for a free drink. Or 3. God knows, men were certainly impressed. Print ads were awful, though. Shot after shot after shot, and smile, 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 and sometimes you were on your feet for 10 hours at a stretch. And the attitude, smile big, honey, then sit on daddy's lap, was worse. And don't get me started on the male models, much more vain than the ladies. To this day, I can't watch Zoolander. It just hits too damn close to home. I'm sure Ben Stiller thought he was making a comedy, but it was really more like a documentary. It was tough work, dating someone who spent more on hair products than I did, and never being able to catch their eye because they were always checking out their reflection. And a lot of them were hounds. Turn your back to get a drink, and you were likely to find your date's du jour chatting up some other bim, or feeling her up. Or feeling up the waiter. I hated being the last to know I was a beard. So embarrassing. About 2 years into it, I'd had enough. All at once. I was sitting in a room full of tall blonde women with long legs and hair, women with my height and coloring, and it occurred to me that the men waiting in the back to interview me didn't care that I loved steak and risotto and scary movies, with the exception of Zoolander, and my mom. They didn't care that I was a member of PETA and a registered Republican. Contrary to popular belief, the two aren't mutually exclusive. Hell, they didn't care if I was a wanted felon. The only thing they cared about was my face and my body. I remember thinking, what am I doing here? Excellent question. I got up and walked out. Didn't even take my portfolio home with me. My friend Jessica has called me a woman of instant decision, and I guess there's some truth in that. Once I make up my mind, that's it. Anyway, I started temping around the Twin Cities, which, like all the jobs I ever had, was fun until I mastered the situation and got bored. Eventually, I had so much experience as a secretary, they made me a super secretary. Excuse me, an executive assistant. Which brought me to Hampton & Sons, where my job was fraught with excitement and danger. Excitement, because there was rarely enough money to pay the company's bills. Danger, because I was often worried I'd succumb to the urge to throttle my boss and go down for homicide. Triple homicide, if the brokers got in my way. Most people complain about their bosses. It's the American way. But I was serious. I truly despised him. Worse, I didn't respect him. And there were days when I wondered if he was really crazy. Last week had been typical. I got to work just in time to be met at the door by wide-eyed brokers who had, in the 10 minutes they'd been unsupervised, broken the copy machine. The brand new copy machine. I swear they were like children. Little children whom you cannot turn your back on. Little chain-smoking children. "It's not working," Todd, the head of the broker posse, informed me. "We'll just have to send it back. I told you we didn't need a new one." The old one got so overheated all our copies were brown and smelled like smoke. "What'd you do?" I said, hanging up my coat. "Nothing. I was making copies and then it clanked and then it stopped." "What did you do?" "Well, I tried to fix it. I didn't want to bother you." He hurried on at my murderous expression. He tried to scurry away, but I grabbed his arm and tugged him toward the machine, which was making an ominous wheezing sound. I pointed to the poster taped on the wall. "Read it." "Betsy, I'm really busy. The market just opened and I have to— Ow! Okay, don't pinch. It says, if anything goes wrong, do not, under any circumstances, fix it yourself. Find Betsy or Terry. There, okay? Just wanted to make sure you hadn't forgotten how to read." I let go of his arm before I gave in to the urge to pinch him again. "Go away. I'll fix it." 20 minutes and one ruined skirt later, stupid toner, the machine was up and running. So I started to go through my mail, only to stop dead at the now familiar monthly letter from the IRS. I marched straight into my boss, Tom's, office. He looked up when I shut the door behind me, spearing me with the dead stare of the classic sociopath. Or maybe he learned it in business school. I shook the letter at him. "The IRS is still looking for our payroll taxes." "I can't deal with that right now," Tom said testily. He was of medium height and resented the hell out of the fact that I was taller, and smoked like cigarettes were going to be outlawed within the week. Despite the strict Minnesota Clean Indoor Air Act, his office smelled like an ashtray. "Talk to me when the market's closed." Tom, we're almost a year behind. That money is our employees, to be paid to the government. You know, state and federal taxes. We can't keep using it to pay our bills. We already owe the government over $100,000. After the market closes, he said, and turned back to his computer. Dismissed. And of course, at 3:01 p.m., he'd be out the door, avoiding any tedious meetings with me. I stomped out. Not a day went by that Tom didn't try something sneaky. He either lied to his customers, lied to his employees, or used their money without telling them. If caught, he would blame me. And he had the uncanny knack of being able to convince people it wasn't his fault. He was a hell of a salesman. I'd give him that. Even I, who knew him well, could often be fooled by his enthusiasm. I hated being his enforcer. Writing up disciplinary reports for the brokers while he got to do the raises. Tom was strictly a fun stuff guy. And I hated it when he made me lie to his clients. They were nice people and had no idea they were trusting a sociopath with their money. But damn it, the money was great. Even better, I was able to work 4 10-hour days, which meant 3-day weekends. 3 days was just about long enough to muster the courage to go back to the office on Monday. It was tough to give up. Any other secretarial job, and I'd have to save for a lot longer to get my shoes. I guess that meant I was a sellout. I stayed until 5 p.m., and as usual, I was the only one. The receptionist went home at 4:30, and everyone else left at 3:30 after the markets were closed. But Tom lived in fear of missing a vital phone call, so I stayed until 5 every night. Well, it was a good way to catch up on my reading. I left at 5 o'clock to meet my date, Todd's nephew, of all people. He assured me we'd get along swimmingly. Normally, I avoided blind dates like they were split ends. But I was lonesome, and hadn't met anyone new in over a year. I was too old for club hopping, and too young for bingo. So I went. Big mistake. Todd's nephew was a foot shorter than I was. This didn't bother me. Most men were shorter than I was. But some fellows seemed to take it personally, like I'd gotten tall just to spite them. All part of my diabolical plan. The nephew, Jerry, was one of these. He kept looking up at me, then would glance away, and then, helplessly, look up at me again. It was like he was dazzled, or horrified, by my long legs. After he'd made several off-color jokes, regaled me with the tales of how he defeated all the grasping, greedy Jews at his accounting firm with wit and cunning, and informed me that the United States should just blow up all the third world countries and end terrorism at a stroke. Presumably with terrorism. I'd had enough. Soulmates we were not. It served me right. I hated dating. I submitted to a goodnight kiss only because I wanted to see how he'd reach. He stood on his tiptoes and I bent down. Soft, moist lips hit the area between my cheek and my mouth, and I got a whiff of beer and garlic. I didn't mind the garlic, but I positively hated beer. I practically broke my wrist ramming the key through the lock so I could get into the house. So, a day in the life. My life. What a waste. And now I was done. I never did anything. Not one thing. Chapter 3. I opened my eyes to pure darkness. When I was a kid, I read a short story about a preacher who went to hell. And when he got there, he discovered the dead didn't have eyelids, so they couldn't close their eyes to block out the horror. Right away, I knew I wasn't in hell, since I couldn't see a thing. I wriggled experimentally. I was in a small, closed space. I was lying on something hard, but the sides of my little cage were padded. If this was a hospital room, it was the strangest one ever. And the drugs were spectacular. I didn't hurt anywhere. And where was everybody? Why was it so quiet? I wriggled some more, then had a brainstorm and sat up. My head banged into something firm but yielding, which gave way when I shoved. Then I was sitting up, blinking, in the gloom. At first I thought I was in a large industrial kitchen. Then I realized I was sitting in a coffin. A white coffin with gold scrolling on the sides, lined in plush pink satin. Ugh. It had been placed on a large stainless steel table. The table was in the middle of the room, and there was a row of sinks against the far wall. Not a stove in sight, just several strange-looking instruments and an industrial-sized makeup kit, which meant this wasn't a kitchen. This was... I nearly broke something scrambling out. As it was, I moved too quickly, and the coffin and I tumbled off the table and onto the floor. I felt the shock in my knees as I hit, but didn't care. In a flash, I shoved the coffin off my back and was on my feet and running. I burst through the swinging doors and found myself in a large wood-paneled entryway. It was even gloomier in here. There were no windows that I could see, just rows and rows of coat racks. At the far end of the entry was a tall, wild-eyed blonde dressed in an absurd pink suit. She might have been pretty if she wasn't wearing orange blusher and too much blue eyeshadow. Her brownish rose lipstick was all wrong for her face, too. Just about any makeup would have been wrong for her, as she was so shockingly pale. The blonde wobbled toward me on cheap shoes. Pay less. Buy one pair, get the second at half price. And I saw her hair was actually quite nice. Shoulder length, with a cute flip at the ends and interesting streaky highlights. Interesting shade number 23. Lush golden blonde highlights. Hey! The woman in the awful suit was me! The woman in the cheap shoes was me! I staggered closer to the mirror, wide-eyed. Yes, it was really me, and yes, I looked this awful. I really was in hell. I forced myself to calm down. When that didn't work, I slapped myself, smearing blush on my palm. Clearly, I was wrong. This wasn't hell. Hell wasn't a wood-paneled entryway with a mirror on one end and a coffin on the other. It made sense that I looked so repugnant. I was dead. That silly ass in the Pontiac Aztec, doubtless conspiring with my cat, had killed me. The perfect end to a perfect day. I was dead, but too dumb to lie down. Dead and walking around inside the funeral home in a cheap suit and fake leather shoes. The funeral must be tomorrow. Later today, I amended, looking at the clock. Who had picked out this outfit for me? And these shoes? I slipped one of the shoes off, looked at the inside. Property of Antonia O'Neill Taylor. I knew it! My stepmother! The bitch meant to bury me wearing her cast-off shoes! This bothered me more than being driven into a tree while my cat watched. I nearly threw the wretched shoe at the mirror, but instead reluctantly forced it back on my foot. It was cold outside, and I'd need the protection. But at such a price! If Giselle could see me now, if anyone I had ever known could see me now. My cat, who was going to look after the little monster. Jessica, probably. Or maybe my mother. Yes, probably my mother. My mother. She'd have been devastated when she got the news. My father, too. He might even take the whole day off work for my funeral. My stepmother, well, I doubted she'd much care. She thought I was a headstrong, spoiled brat, and I thought she was a conniving, dishonest, gold-digging bitch. And the fact that we were both right, and had been since we laid eyes on each other, didn't help at all. It occurred to me that I should seek out my grieving friends and family and tell them I had no intention of being buried. I had to find a new job, for crying out loud. I couldn't hang out in a coffin 6 feet under. I had to pay my bills or they'd shut off my cable. Then, sanity returned. I was dead. I'd been zombified, or whatever, and needed to finish the job the guy in the Aztec had started. Or maybe this was purgatory. A task set for me. Something I had to finish before God opened the gate. I had the fleeting thought that the doctors in the ER had made a mistake, but shook it off. I remembered, too well, the sound of my skull shattering. If it hadn't killed me, I'd be in an ICU now with more tubes than a chemistry classroom, not dolled up like a dead whore wearing cheap cast-offs on my dead feet. All that aside, to be brutally honest, I couldn't bear for anyone to see me looking the way I did. I would literally rather be dead. Again. I gave my reflection one final incredulous once-over, then walked to the end of the hallway, found the stairwell, and started climbing. The funeral home was 3 stories high, and what they needed the other 2 stories for I was not going to think about, which should be high enough, since I planned to go head first. My nasty shoes clacked on the stairs. I wouldn't let myself look down at my feet. At first I thought the door was locked, but with a good hard shove, it obligingly opened with a shriek of metal on metal. I stepped outside. It was a beautiful spring night. All traces of snow from the storm had melted. The air smelled wet and warm, like fertility. I had the oddest feeling that if I were to scatter seeds on the cement rooftop, they would take hold and grow. A night had never, ever smelled so sweetly. Not even the day I moved into my own place. City lights twinkled in the distance, reminding me of Christmas. Reminding me all my Christmases were done. There were a few cars moving on the street below, and far off, I could hear a woman laughing. Well, at least someone was having a good time. As I stepped onto the ledge, I ignored the not inconsiderable twinge of apprehension that raced up my spine. Even though I was dead, I didn't like looking down at the street. I stifled the urge to step back to safety. Safety? Ha! What was that? This wasn't my last night on Earth. That had been a couple of days ago. There was nothing to feel sad about. I had been a good girl in life, and now I was going to my reward, damn it. I was not going to stumble around like a zombie, scaring the hell out of people and pretending I still had a place in the world. God, I said, teetering for balance. It's me, Betsy. I'm coming to see you now. Make up the guest room. I dove off the roof, fought the urge to curl into a cannonball, and hit the street below, head first, exactly as I had planned. What was not in the plan was the smashing, crunching pain in my head when I hit, and how I didn't even lose consciousness, much less see my pal God. Instead, I groaned, clutched my head, then finally stood when the pain abated, only to get creamed by an early morning garbage truck. I looked up in time to see the horror-struck driver mouthing, "Jesus Christ, lady, look out!" something. Then my forehead made brisk contact with the truck's front grille. I slid down it like roadkill and hit the street, ass first. That hurt less than hitting the grill, but not by much. I lay in the street for a long moment, seriously debating whether or not to get up. Finally, I decided I couldn't lie there forever. Clearly, I was bad at just lying anywhere, and slowly got to my feet. When I stood, brushing dirt from my cheap skirt and blowing my hair out of my face, the driver slammed the truck in reverse and got the hell out of Dodge. Not that I could blame him. I was probably a gruesome sight. But who ever heard of a hit-and-run garbage truck? Chapter 4. I am nothing if not persistent. Flinging myself into the Mississippi didn't work. I found I no longer needed to breathe. I trudged around on the muddy river bottom for half an hour, patiently waiting to drown, before giving up and slogging my way back to shore. Interestingly, I couldn't feel the cold, though it couldn't have been more than 45 degrees, and I was super soaked. Grounding myself while I held onto a live power line didn't work either, though it did awful things to my hair. I drank a bottle of bleach, and the only consequence was a startling case of dry mouth. I was so thirsty. I shoplifted a butcher knife from the nearby Walmart. The place to shop if you're dead. It's 3 a.m., and you don't have any credit cards, and stabbed myself in the heart. Nothing. A small trickle of blood flowed sluggishly, and, while I watched in horrified fascination, slowed and stopped. In another few minutes, the only sign I'd stabbed myself was the cut in my suit, and a modest bloodstain. I was trudging down Lake Street, trying to figure out how to decapitate myself, when I heard low voices and what sounded like muffled crying. I almost moved on. Didn't I have enough problems of my own? When good sense returned, and I walked through the alley and around the corner. I took in the scene at once. 3 men hulking around a woman in a sort of sinister half-moon. She was holding hands with a big-eyed girl. The girl looked about 6 or so. Fear made the woman look about 50. Her purse was lying on the ground between them. Nobody moved to get it, and I had a quick, clear thought. She tossed it at them and tried to run, and they cornered her. They don't want her purse. They want... "Please," she said, almost whispered, and I thought the acoustics must be very good for me to have heard them from almost a block away. "Don't do anything to me in front of my daughter. I'll go with you. I'll do whatever you want. Just please, please. Mommy, don't leave me here by myself." The girl's eyes were light brown, almost whiskey-colored, and when they filled with tears, I felt something lurch inside my dead heart. "Just, you go away. Leave my mommy alone, you stinkers." "Shh, Justine, shh." The woman was trying to pry her daughter's fingers free and made a ghastly attempt at a laugh. "She's tired. It's late. I'll go with you." "Don't want you," one of the men said, his eyes on the girl. Justine burst into fresh tears, but not before kicking the ground, raining pebbles and grit on the man's feet. Even in the midst of my shock at witnessing such a horrid scene, I admired the hell out of the girl. "I'll take you back to my car. The engine's dead, but I could... with all of you, just don't... "Hey, assholes," I said cheerfully. All 5 of them jumped, which surprised me. I wasn't the world's quietest walker. I couldn't believe I was doing this. I wasn't exactly the confrontational type. On the other hand, what did I possibly have to lose? You 3 assholes, not the lady and the kid. Fellas, could you come over here and kill me, please? While they were busy killing me, the 2 of them could run for it. Everyone wins. Relieved, Justine smiled at me, revealing the gap where she'd lost one of her baby teeth. Then the men moved forward, and Justine grabbed her mom's hand and started dragging her toward the relative safety of Lake Street. "Come on, Mommy. Get help." "Don't you dare," I snapped. "If you mess up my murder, I'll be furious." One of the men had grabbed my arm and was dragging me back toward Justine and her mom. "Just a minute, pal. I've got a..." He poked me hard, and without thought, I shoved.